All right, hey guys, we are going to continue again with The Tiger Rising. We read chapters 20 and 21 last, and we read, remember Rob had just gotten the keys from Mr. Beauchamp for the tiger cage because he was going to feed him, and he ended up seeing Sistine after school one day when the bus dropped her off, and she immediately wanted to go see the tiger, and he ended up kind of blurting out again, because that's what he does around her. He ended up blurting out again that he has the keys and he was feeding the tiger. And so Sistine was like, okay, let's get this tiger out of here. Let's do this, get it out of the cage. It shouldn't be there. And Rob was like, no, we can't do that. And, they keep fighting about it. And Sistine ends up, she just starts crying. She's, shaking the cage, and she's just really upset. She's obviously more upset about more than just the tiger being let loose. It's something else. It's deep inside of her. And so Rob tries to comfort her the best that he can. By the time they get back to the Kentucky Star, it's dusk, so it's getting later, and they run into Willie Mae as Sistine is going to call her mom. And Willie Mae and Sistine don't exactly hit it off. They're both very strong-willed, very independent ladies, and they kind of butt heads at the beginning when they first meet here. And it kind of makes Rob upset because he really wants them to like each other because he's friends with them both and he wants them to be friends as well. And Willie Mae says that Sistine is angry, and Sistine's like, I'm not angry. I don't know what you're talking about. And then Willie Mae calls her an angry liar. Now she's lying about being angry, so she's an angry liar. And they kind of go back and forth, and at the end of the chapter, they kind of have an understanding, and they're okay with one another. And Sistine calls Willie Mae a prophetess, and Rob thinks, okay, that sounds about right. If that were going to be the case for anybody, it would probably be Willie Mae. So let's see what happens next in chapter 22. You out in the woods with that girl again? His father asked as soon as Rob stepped into the room. Yes, sir, said Rob. Look over here, son, his father said, standing by Rob's bed. Sir, said Rob. His heart sank. He knew his father had found the meat. He had hidden it under his bed until it was time to go and feed the tiger again. Where did this meat come from? His father asked, pointing at the bloody brown bag. Without thinking, Rob said, Beauchamp. Beauchamp, his father repeated, low and dark. Beauchamp. He don't hardly pay me enough to get by. Now he's giving us rotten meat. He thinks I ain't man enough to put meat on my own table? Rob wanted to say something, but then he thought of Beauchamp and held his tongue. I ought to teach him a lesson, his father said. The cords in his neck stood out like twigs. He kicked the bag of meat. I ought to, he said. Making me work for less than nothing, giving us rotten meat. He went and stood in front of the gun case. He didn't unlock it. He just stood there and stared at me, cracked his knuckles. Daddy, said Rob. But he couldn't think of anything to say after that. His mother had known how to calm his father down. She would put her hand on his arm or say his name in a soft and reproachful voice, and that would be enough. But Rob didn't know how to do those things. He stood for a minute more, and then he walked over to his bed and grabbed a piece of wood and his knife. As he left the room, his father was still standing near the locked gun case, staring through the glass at his deer hunting rifle as if he was trying to will the gun into his hands. Rob walked to the Kentucky Star sign. He sat down underneath it and leaned up against one of the cold, damp poles and started to work on the wood. But his head was too full of his father's anger and Sistine's tears. He couldn't concentrate. He looked up at the dark underside of the sign and recalled lying on a blanket staring up at a big oak tree. His mother had been on one side of him and his father, asleep and snoring, had been on the other. He remembered that his mother had taken hold of his hand and pointed up at the sun shining through the leaves of the tree and said, Look, Rob, I've never in my life seen a prettier color of green. Ain't it perfect? Yes, ma'am, he said, staring at the leaves. It looks like the original green, the first one God thought up. His mother squeezed his hand hard. That's right, she said. The first one he ever thought up. The first ever green. You and me, we see the world the same. He concentrated on that green. He let it seep through a crack in his suitcase of non-thoughts and fill up his head with color. He wondered if Willie Mae's cricket had been the same bright and original green. That's what he thought about as he carved. And so he wasn't surprised when he stopped and held the wood away from himself to see a wing and a beak and a tiny eye. It was Cricket, Willie Mae's cricket, coming to life under his knife. He worked on the bird a bit longer until it looked so real that he half expected it to break into song. When he finally went back to the room, he found his father asleep on the recliner. The gun case was still locked and the bag of meat was gone. He wouldn't be able to feed the tiger that morning. He would have to wait until Beauchamp bought him another package. Rob went and stood over his father and stared down at him. He looked at his heavy hands and the bald spot on his nodding head. He was memorizing him and trying at the same time to understand him, to make sense of him, out of his anger and his quiet, and comparing it to the way he used to sing and smile when his father jerked awake. "Hey," he said. "Hey," Rob said back. "What time is it?" "I ain't sure," said Rob. "Late, I guess." His father sighed. "Go on and give me that leg medicine." Rob brought him the tube of medicine. Outside the motel room, the world creaked inside. Rain started in again, and his father's hands were gentle as he applied the ointment to Rob's legs. Chapter 23. The next morning, Rob put the keys to the tiger cage in one pocket and the wooden bird in the other, and set out looking for Willie Mae. He found her in the laundry room, sitting on one of the fold-up chairs, smoking a cigarette and staring into space. "Hey there," she said to him. Where's your lady friend at?" "School," said Rob, "but today's only a half day." He kept his hands in his pockets. Now that he stood before Willie Mae, he was afraid to give her the bird. What if it was wrong? What if he had carved it wrong and it didn't look anything like the real cricket? "What you giving me them shifty eyes looks for?" Willie Mae asked. "I made you something," Rob said quickly before he lost his nerve. "You made me something," said Willie Mae. "For real?" "Uh-huh. Close your eyes and hold out your hand." "I ain't," said Willie Mae. But she smiled and closed her eyes and put out her enormous hand, palm up. Rob carefully placed the bird into it. "Okay, you can look now," he told her. She closed her fingers around the little piece of wood, but she didn't open her eyes. She puffed on her cigarette. The long gray ash on the end of it trembled. "Don't need to look," she finally said. The cigarette ash dropped to the floor. "I know what I got in my hand. It's cricket." "But you gotta look at it and tell me, did I do it right?" said Rob. "I ain't got to do nothing," said Willie Mae, "except stay black and die." She opened her eyes slowly, as if she were afraid she might frighten the bird into flying away. "This the right bird," she said, nodding her head. "This the one." "Now, you don't got to dream about him no more," said Rob. "That's right," said Willie Mae. "Where'd you learn to work a piece of wood like this?" "My mama," said Rob. Willie Mae nodded. "She taught you good." "Yes, ma'am," said Rob. He stared down at his legs. "I know a wooden bird ain't the same as having a real one." "It ain't," said Willie Mae, "but it soothes my heart just the same. My dad said he ain't got no jobs for me till this afternoon. He said I could help you out this morning." "Well," said Willie Mae. She dropped the bird in front of the pocket of her dress. "I might could find some way for you to help me." So Rob spent the morning following Willie Mae from room to room, stripping the dirty sheets from the beds. And while he worked, the keys jingled in his pocket. And he knew that soon Sistine would be out of school and that she would demand again that he unlock the cage and let the tiger go. All right, so we will have to see what happens with Sistine when she gets out of school. All right, guys, have a great day. Bye.